In this video I'm going to show you how to add and remove hair from face stimuli. In the end you should end up with something that looks like this. So this is comedian Hugh Laurie with a bald head. So first things first, let's close the finished one. As always, I recommend having a folder with just all of the resources you're going to use throughout this already stored in it. So let's load in our starting image. So I recommend finding an image with just a blank color background, because that's going to be a lot easier to work with than if it's got a really complicated background. And it's also best to have them just facing directly towards the camera like this and have it in decent resolution. So once you've found your image, the next thing to do is to go out and find another picture of someone with a similar kind of skin tone, kind of similar face and head structure, who you think their top of their head is going to map closely onto this, because of course Photoshop can't draw a bald head, so you have to find one and kind of edit it on. So for this one I'm going to be using Patrick Stewart, this particular picture of Patrick Stewart. Now, as with the image you're going to be editing, it's important to have a kind of block color background. Things like this, where it's pretty much the same color but not quite, they're usually fine. What you really want to avoid is anything particularly complex that you're going to have to replicate. And just as before, you want them to have the same kind of gaze looking forwards, similar kind of skin tone, and similar kind of lighting. So these are both pictures of them looking directly at the camera. Now, I inserted this by just dragging and dropping it onto the image. It's important to drag it onto the image. If you drag it up to the top, it will just open it as a new file. So while you're in what's called placing mode, you can resize it however you want. I'm just going to press Ctrl and Z to undo that. If you press and hold Alt and Shift, you can resize it from the center, maintaining its proportions. So Shift maintains proportions and Alt makes it go from the center. So both of them together do both. So we're going to just resize him to about the same size as Hugh Laurie. I think maybe about there. It might be a bit small still. But when you're done, you just press Enter, and that will then leave place mode. And as you can see down here in the layer menu, we now have the background, which is Hugh Laurie, and then Patrick Stewart on top of him. So if we go to the opacity here and set it to, let's say, 60, maybe a lower, there we go, and click back onto that. So now what we've done is basically just made him a little bit see-through, which means that when we press and hold Control and click on him, we can move him around, and we can see where he is in relation to the picture below him. So I was right, that's definitely too small. So let's press Control and T to go back into that resizing function. And then pressing and holding Shift and Alt, we just expand it again until it's more the size we want. The critical thing at this stage, and this is a bit more of an art than a science at this point, is to line up their eyes and their ears as closely as possible. Let's make him a little bit smaller. There, I think that's probably the best compromise we're going to get between the ears and the eyes being lined up. So when it's in a good place, you just go Enter and turn the opacity back up to 100%. So obviously we now have these two pictures that are kind of lined up just right, but what we really want is just the head of this one. So what we're going to do is go to Layer, Layer Mask, and then Hide All. And as you can see, that just completely hides this top layer. And it's put this little block on it here. Now making sure this block is selected, because you can click between them. So making sure that this block is selected, this is the mask. Now anything on this mask that's black will be invisible, anything on that's white will be visible. So if we just set our color to be white, and you can do it by just clicking that, we'll automatically set it to black and white, and that swaps them around. So we select our brush tool, and what we do is we just draw in the areas we want to be covered with bald head. So just do that. Now this is why it's useful that the background is white, because obviously if I go over it, it doesn't really matter too much because it's a white background against a white background. That's not bad. That's pretty well lined up. But all we have to do is if we go back to the layer menu and select the picture rather than the mask, pressing and holding Control, we can move it down and we can readjust it however we like. Now you can see there's a little bit of Hugh Laurie's hair poking up at the back there. So let's go back to that background layer. And while we're in the brush tool, if we press Alt, see we get this color dropper. So all I do is click with the color dropper and it'll pick up the color of your background. So then I'm just going to, making Patrick invisible, let's go on to Hugh Laurie and just kind of cover up all of his hair. Because of course, hair takes up more space than a bald head, so you'll be able to see it behind otherwise. So we're just going to kind of trim the edges down so he's not going to be kind of poking out around the back. Going to Patrick Stewart. Okay, that's good. So now what we need to do, now there's two ways of doing this. We need to remove the background from Patrick Stewart. So you can either click on the actual layer and go with something like the magic wand, if it's a good quality background, but this isn't. As you can see, there's loads of little bits kind of popping off all over the place. There are a few things we can do about this. So we can set it to contiguous for a start, and click off, and then click back on. And that means that it's not going to be selecting anything that isn't attached. Or we could turn the tolerance up, because you see there's this bit around his ears. It isn't looking great. So let's turn it up to 25. Deselect and select. So you see these little blocks here are gone. It's generally just a bit closer because it's accepting more difference with the pixels. If we press delete, in order to do this we need to rasterize it. What rasterizing does is changes it from being a smart object to being just pixels. So to rasterize something, you just right click on the layer and go rasterize layer. And then if we delete, okay, so there's a little bit of Hugh Laurie showing up underneath still, but we can fix that later. For now I'm going to show you the other way of doing this. So if we just go Control Alt and Z just to go back through all the steps I just did. We can also go into the layer mask, and this is going to be useful for people who aren't on quite as nice a background or don't have quite as clear a line between their head and the background. So for this we get the brush tool, and we just, setting it to black, making sure we're on the layer mask, we just kind of colour this out. You can already see a bit of hair poking through there. Okay, and for crisp lines, what you can do is, if you click up here in the top left, you can change the size of your brush. So if I set it to, that's a huge brush. So there I've got quite a big one, which affects quite a large area. And if I set it down really low, you have quite a small brush for quite small areas. Hardness means that, so at the moment, you see this kind of soft edge to it. If we turn the hardness up to full, you can see it just does these really harsh circles. So I think a good compromise for this is going to be hardness at around 80 and the size at maybe 40. So now what we'll do is we'll just trace this outline. Now I think with a bald head it's probably best to use the first method because you're going to get the crispest lines. So let's go back to the magic wand tool and let's just select the background again. See, our tolerance is still on 25. It's still contiguous, which means it'll only select the nearby, the ones that are touching the color you clicked on. And it's anti-alias, so it'll have that kind of slight border to it, so it won't look like too harsh of a line. So then we just press delete. And of course I forgot that I unrasterized it when I pressed Control and Z all those times. So re-rasterize that layer, press delete, and press Control and D to deselect. And there we go, we have it's a bit of a harsh line, but I think that's probably the best we could hope for. A few ways around getting that harsh line. If we go just back into this Magic Wand selection, if you go Select, Modify, Expand, and just expand it by 1 pixel, that makes the selection ever so slightly bigger, so it'll cover that little bit of white just around his head. So then we press Delete again to clear that. What we can also do is go Select, Modify, Feather, and that'll put a little bit of a kind of softer edge to it. So let's just do a radius of 1 pixels. And we press Delete again, and if we just go Control and D, so you see that's a bit softer. It's still not great, but it'll do. So now let's go back to Hue and get rid of what's left of his hair. So if we get that, that brush again, select the background color, and you see now I've still got my brush set to that kind of harder setting, so it's got much more of a hard edge to it. And we're just going to trace around his ears and cover him all around here. And around those ears. So now the problem we have is that the two pictures, they did have slightly different skin tones. Patrick Stewart's a lot more yellow. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Patrick Stewart, select the actual image, not the mask, and we're going to press Control and U. So that opens this menu which lets us edit the hue, saturation and lightness. What hue is the color. So this completely changes the color of this layer. So if we set that back to 0, that's back to normal. Saturation is essentially how intense the colors are. So that's full saturation, and minimum saturation is always just going to be black and white. And lightness, of course, is just light to dark. So what we are going to do is just kind of do it by eye, but I think we definitely need to move this a bit to the left because that'll make it more red. And I think I went a little bit too far, but already that's looking a lot better. Let's turn the saturation, I think, down a little bit, just minus 1 or 2 steps. And then the lightness up a little bit. Have a click OK. There we go, we now have a rather horrifying looking bald Hugh Laurie. Now this same principle can be used on people of any kind of skin tone. So I've used Patrick Stewart and Hugh Laurie because they both have relatively similar skin tones, but so long as you match the bald head to the face in terms of skin tone, it doesn't matter what skin tone they have. So for example, here is a cross of Donald Glover and Terry Crews. Obviously both people who have darker skin, but because they both have dark skin it works, because they match one another. And this effect can also be used to add hair in, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So what I'm going to do is get that picture of Patrick Stewart that I was using for the bald head, click and drag that up to this bar up here. So you see here would insert it into this image, dragging and dropping up here opens a new image. There we go. And this time I'm going to drag Hugh Laurie onto it. Okay, so once again we're in this kind of initial placing mode, so let's just move him around with the left click of the mouse, Alt and Shift to shrink him to the size we want. Let's see, maybe a little bit smaller. A little bit bigger actually. Okay, so that's an approximate size, so when we press Enter, that kind of applies those changes. Now let's turn the opacity down. I think we had it at 70 before, so then we just click off that. Pressing and holding Control to move them around. We just move and position whatever seems reasonable. So we want to line up those ears and those eyes. Okay, so once we've got them in place, we just, as before, turn the opacity back up to 100. And we go to Layer, Layer Mask, Hide All. So now making sure we've got the brush tool selected, set our front color to be white, make sure we're on the layer mask, and we just draw it on. Now see, I've still got my brush set to that kind of high hardness setting, so let's turn that down a little bit so we can get a bit more of a soft touch on it. You can see here I've hit the top of the image, so nothing above that will be revealed because there isn't anything above that. And I think I got quite lucky in how I placed this because it seems to be in about the right place already. So already you can see this is pretty much, that's Patrick Stewart with hair. So let's turn the size of the brush up and the hardness down. Now this is where the really soft touch approach works better because hair generally isn't a harsh line in the way that a bald head is. So we're going to turn the size up and the hardness down. And we're going to swap this around so that the colour is black, making sure we're still on the layer mask. If I just do this, you can see these kind of harsh edges disappear and it looks a lot more naturally placed. So I'm just drawing around this with the brush. I think that's a bit too far. Now what we'll do is turn the size down a bit and pressing Control plus and Control minus to zoom in and out, and using this navigator window to move back up to here. Let's just get the real kind of finer points. And now let's do around his face as well, so we'll get rid of as much of Hugh Laurie's skin as we can and make sure that that line is nice and soft. Okay, so now the last thing to do is we go back to the layer, press Control and U once again, and we'll just adjust the hue in the other direction this time to make it more yellow to match Patrick Stewart, and turn the saturation up just 2 points and the lightness down. So we're basically just doing the inverse of what we did before. And let's go OK. Now press Control minus to zoom out. And there we have Patrick Stewart with hair. I'm not sure if that's more or less horrifying than Hugh Laurie without, but I'll leave that up to you. So yeah, that's how you add and remove hair from faces in Photoshop.